Have your attention, please. Everybody good? Everybody having a good time, first of all. I hope you like the Mohegan Sun. I hope you like comic books. And let me tell you, from bringing a certain person on this panel from the airport yesterday, he not only loves comic books and wants to talk about them, but he can beat any fanboy in this entire complex right now. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's give it up for Mr. Roy Thomas. Living comic book encyclopedia. You name the character, he knows what's going on with it.
Not Deadpool.
No, I said good comic book characters. And then to my right, you know him, you love him, you can't live without him. Every time you cut a piece of apple pie, he bleeds. Ladies and gentlemen, all-American artist, the guy, as we go to lunch now and then, I tell the people, the Denny's and stuff, or Dutchess Diner, I go, that guy killed Superman. They're like, what? Ladies and gentlemen, let's give it up for Mr. Jerry Ordway. Your official moderator for this, you know him, you love him again, you can't live without him, Mr. Matthew, the Secret Identity Podcast, author of the Doctor Who book, Herring, right here. Let's do that. I'm Mitch Halleck, the guy who's the wallet behind all this stuff. You know, we have fun. Thank you, my superpower. I'm going to leave in a second because my wife is texting me. Matt's going to take over. But I came up with the idea because I loved World War II heroes. My dad was in the Marine Corps. Let's hear it. Grandma threw out all the comic books when he went off to the Marines, but all I would hear about is, I had all those books during World War II, and that's why we're doing this tonight, because my dad made me go and read all those comic books to get back at his grandma. So, or my grandma. So, but one of the things he loved and he would get me is World War II comics, and there was nothing better in the 70s than the Invaders, because I'm a Marvel guy. I'm a Marvel zombie, okay? Captain America, you know it. Loved it. Didn't like so much the All-Star Squadron or whatever, because that was my dad's superheroes. Those were the ones from the 40s and such. That's the old-timer stuff. He's Sean Connery, I was Roger Moore. So then they came out with a book called All-Star Squadron, and in issue 2 or 3, they referenced Indiana Jones, I believe, right? It said Indiana Jones. Yeah, but that was the big movie of the summer, 1981. I'm obsessed with it. If you can't tell, there's a bunch of Indiana Jones displays. My dog's name's Indiana. So I bought that book every issue after that. Rich Buckler, Jerry Ordway, Roy Thomas, fantastic stories about World War II. Great. So before I leave, I just want to throw this out there, and then you guys can fight it up. Who would win in a fight? The Invaders or the All-Star Squadron? Let's go, Roy.
I think the All-Star Squadron win because there's more of them.
Yeah.
Even if you had drafted all the other timely Marvel characters, you'd still have more DC, especially when by the time you also have Fawcett and Quality thrown in.
No,
they'd be outnumbered.
DC boy.
Besides, you got Superman and Captain Marvel on that side. They can beat the hell out of somebody.
You know going on. Come on. All right, Ordway.
Captain Marvel, he knows.
Seriously.
Oh, why, Jerry? Do you like Captain Marvel? I never guessed. No. All right, that's your answer. All-Star Squadron.
It doesn't mean they're the best, the nicest. They're just the strongest. That's all.
Whatever. You too?
Yeah. Sure.
All right, I'm out of this one here.
You lose.
I lose. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's give up Matt here. He's going to talk to these gentlemen about World War II and how the heroes came back to save the world. I'll see you later.
I remember World War II, which is embarrassing.
Oh, that's embarrassing.
See, I'm a little shocked and a little sad that was what I got bumped for, that question.
Yeah.
Holy cow. I guess my next question about what's your favorite color is certainly not the worst one you could ask. I think the reason I got asked to do this panel with you guys is that when I was a kid reading comics growing up in the 70s, it was all war comics. That's all I read. My introduction, my gateway drug to superheroes was Invaders '1. I never even knew who Captain America was until I picked up Invaders #1.
Was it Invaders one or giant size?
Not giant size, because
yeah.
my parents wouldn't have bought me a 50-cent book, but they would buy me a 25-cent book.
Okay.
So that was probably my 5th or 6th comic I ever bought, was Invaders #1. I take that back, probably my 20th or 30th, but all war books was what I read. So one of the things that I always think about was, and you guys can both answer this, but it's a little harder on the DC side for one particular reason. Was it hard for you to keep it easy? Was it hard for you to keep it from these guys just showing up into Berlin and taking down Hitler? If you think about the Invaders, look, they could have just gone right in and done it. Issue 19 when they got captured and were kind of humiliated by Hitler of the invaders, is one of my favorite ones. But these guys could have just, Submariner could have just walked to Berlin and taken down Hitler.
Well, I'll answer first because I worked on both of them, and Jerry can have his opinion. In the case of the invaders, it wasn't as much of a problem because as strong as they were, you know, it wasn't like they're not Superman or Captain Marvel or, God forbid, the Spectre or Dr. Fate. But, you know, they were strong, but I mean, still a Human Torch. You know, Captain America, I mean, you know, you couldn't Submariner. They're strong, but none of them were totally invulnerable. Good Shell could have even gotten Submariner, and the other guys were weaker than that. So they were strong, but I don't think they could have done it on their own. So that wasn't a real problem, even though, you know, it was in the back of my mind, but it wasn't too much of a problem. But then when I came with the idea of the All-Star Squadron, I thought, my God, this is going beyond. Because even though Captain Marvel, they wouldn't let me use Captain Marvel as a regular member because they didn't own him yet. They were only leasing him at that stage. I thought, you know, you've got Superman and the Spectre and Dr. Fate and Green Lantern. Not to mention the Flash, who could run a lot faster than the Wizard, you know, and who could have run to Berlin and throttled Hitler and come back and had tea, you know, or something, you know. And plus a lot of other characters that were very strong. But even those 5 or 6 or 7 of them by themselves, any one of them could have done it, you know. So I came up with this idea, which was that I needed something to kind of keep the most powerful characters out of Europe. So I came up with the what was it? The Sphere of Destiny, which forgot the name I was thinking of, and that Steve Englehart had put into a Weird War story.
Weird War Tales number 50.
Yeah, I was aware of it, but since he had already put it in the comic books, and then Paul Evans had used in the origin of the Justice Society, so it was a perfect natural too. And then all I had to do said, well, along with this, I came up with the Holy Grail and made this thing based on a couple of things I'd read, and we made that for the Japanese side, so that if they entered the spheres of those characters, these most powerful characters, if they had some kind of special vulnerability to magic, you know, like Spectre did, and Superman kind of faked that a little bit, Captain Marvel later, they would become controlled by it, and therefore they couldn't go in there. And so we kind of faked the Flash and a couple of them, we didn't, you know, but it sort of helped to do that. I always intended that sooner or later, you know, I would do some kind of more stories that dealt with it, but except for that one story with Captain Marvel, we only had about 60 or 70 issues, so I never got around to it. Anyway, Jared, what was yours? Because you had to draw some
I remember mostly is I just thought that was a great way of keeping those characters kind of off the table. It made the story harder. You know, I mean, everybody always says, well, Superman could just go and, you know, take over everything, kill Hitler and the entire, you know, Axis or whatever. So it was a good way of kind of handcuffing them.
They had the same problem back in the World War II because, you know, you had Superman and Captain Marvel as actual characters then, and that was a problem that readers were asking then. If they're reading these stories, why aren't these guys doing something?
Well, the whole series, I mean, I always felt like, well, All-Star Squadron really sprang out of your childhood. I mean, there's no way it didn't, and you really loved those characters. I mean, you gave them like an extra life. To me, the best, and I hear it at conventions, I hear people say, oh, they loved Robot Man, they loved, you know, Liberty Bell, they loved Johnny Quick. There were characters
nobody ever heard of.
Right. By that point, nobody really knew them because they weren't even used in the 70s All-Star comic, you know. So, I mean, that's a testament to imbuing a character with life. There's no bad character. That's always, you know, that's a truism, is what you do with them. And kids still like these characters.
Yeah, I mean, for me, if you know, Desert Island comics, as a kid we used to do Desert Island discs. What albums would you bring on an island? The one I always mentioned would be the entire 41 issues plus 1 annual and 1 giant size of the Invaders. And for me, that was my first introduction to Jack Kirby as well, because Kirby did the covers.
I got to do all the covers I could, whenever possible. Yeah, I was always thrilled to get him to do the covers.
And then I look back at All-Star Squadron, and one of the big things for me was having Joe Kubert do quite a few of those covers. And when you're talking about Robot Man, I think of Robot Man on the cover, and I want to say it's either 2 or 9, but it's the one when he's ripping off the the cockpit of the Stuka. Number 2.
Yeah.
The yellow cover. I mean,
That was the first
see
cover
how bad
you
I
did,
am?
yeah.
See,
Yeah.
And it's I can't remember my wife's name during a panel I just did. I did a Doctor Who one, and I'm like, that character, the one that Matt Smith was with, they're like, Amy Pond. I'm like, my wife's name is Amy. How did I forget that? But there was such magic, and you know, I remember reading those and thinking, you know, Roy, you love those characters, you can tell. And then reading the, you know, seeing the All-Star Squadron stuff with Jerry, it's like, you must love drawing these guys because, holy cow.
Well, I mean, the thing that's funny is, for me, it wasn't an entire introduction to those characters when I started working on All-Star. I was like the finisher, inker on this stuff. And Roy, you had sent me books, you'd sent me Xeroxes, I mean, I had a ton of reference copied from your comics.
What? You had to look at reference?
Yeah. But well, I needed it because Rich Buckler did kind of like pencil layouts kind of things that didn't really have detail in them. So I needed reference on planes and things like this. Anyways, but the characters, I really did always like, I have to say, I like that Earth 2 concept, even though I wasn't like a fanatic about it, but I like the idea of, especially in Earth 2 Superman. Because I remember seeing in the All-Star comics that were done, you know, in the 70s, I just remember that being like a really special book to me because it introduced Power Girl, you know, the newer versions, it was contemporary, but I really liked, and Wally Wood, I think the big key for me was Wally Wood because he made Our Man look terrific. He had just a way of doing it, and it, you know, it wasn't realism or anything like that, but he made me love those characters. So when
he wasn't a bad artist, actually, Wally.
He had some success.
But it's just funny. That's, you know, you have to find a hook. But the hook for me working on the book was the fact that Roy he really had kind of given them all a real life, and that's, I mean, they're like comic books. You know, you think about it. People now, everything has got to be real, and you have to somehow have some greater meaning to stuff. But basing and grounding it in the war made me not a fan of World War II, obviously, but a fan of history in that sense, because I had to do research to be able to draw stuff.
Yeah, well, Jerry was our secret weapon from kind of the beginning. I don't remember how detailed or undetailed Rich's things were, but you know, but he only did about 5 issues anyway, and then he left for whatever reasons. But you were on as the inker from the very beginning, except for that first cover, and then of course Cuba's cover. Right. But then you became even more important when he left, because Adrian Gonzalez was sort of doing just layouts, and he actually did pretty good layouts. And by the time the two came together, it really looked good. Yeah. And then you know, of course, it became the third, penciler. It didn't do it too long, but about a year, I guess, something like that. Right. And so, you know, but from the beginning, you were very important to that book, which is kind of funny because I didn't really want you put on it. Right. Know? I mean, they told me you had this new artist. You want to find if you know who it is. Right. Well, if he was available, he did the inking, and he inked Rich. I don't know if I had any particular person. I just it's just good to have somebody you know. I hadn't seen, they didn't do me the honor of showing me any of your work. That still happens. That's an editorial thing. They like to. So the first thing I ever saw of your work is when you inked that
preview.
Fill-in,
the preview, which you did everything but the splash page, I guess. Dick did that too, didn't he? The splash page drawing.
I think
of them all charging.
Yeah,
but you did the story.
The splash was like the fake.
You did the 14, and and that was the first I saw it. I said, well, this works out just fine. But in advance they had not told me, and I sort of wanted to know. But Len Wein was the editor, and he did a real good job. Yeah. And he felt like he wasn't going to edit the book that much, because my deal with him was, they were kind of going to, they weren't going to interfere that much with the book. They could tell me I couldn't use this character like Captain Marvel or something, but otherwise they were going to kind of leave me alone. So the areas Len had, like the cover, so he would never talk to me about the cover because that was his domain, And actually, I think he did a great job with it. The cover of All-Star Squadron #1. Which I guess was either his idea or his and Rich's together, however it was, in which Giordano inked, is my favorite cover of all time. Anything I ever worked on. And I'm sorry, of course, I'm sorry that you didn't ink it in a way, and I'm sorry I'm sorry I can't say anything that I had anything to do with it at all. I wrote the rest of the book. but I had nothing to do with that cover, but it's still my favorite.
I was just, this is off the, before you ask a
Oh,
question.
no.
But one of the things that I was giggling to myself at, because these things always bring back memories. One of the memories that I don't even think Roy knew about, the first issue, we had done this preview for All-Star, it ran in Justice League, and in the first issue of the book itself, I was sitting there waiting on pages. I hadn't gotten any pages. And I was, shouldn't I be getting pages? This is back in the day when you weren't really connected except by telephone. So I called in the office, it's like, when am I going to get pages? We sent that out like last week, you didn't get it. It's like, no, I didn't get it. So that was like one of those unusual FedEx packages. It's the only time a FedEx package I can remember that I was involved with got lost permanently. But the pages disappeared. So I got copies, photocopies of the pages, but your margin notes, because the pages were bigger, your margin notes didn't fit. So I didn't see margin notes. So I had these pages, gray Xerox pencils
With notes to say do this and do that, but they're cut
so
off.
I didn't have no sense of what was supposed to be happening, but I had to ink them in vellum, which was a thing, is like a translucent
I've seen the
paper.
splash page, but I didn't realize you had to do more than
Every
that.
one of those pages, because
Really?
they didn't say light box, they didn't say anything. You have to ink it on vellum, because then you can just see the pencils beneath it. But vellum is like a really tricky material that you can't use a pen on really well. The paper would crinkle if you had a black area you filled in. So the paper was like a topographical map after a while. It was really a challenge just to do it.
How
but
many
also,
pages was it?
It was 17 of the
The
pages.
splash page with Hawkman
From
and then
page
the first
1
6
through
pages? Oh, yeah.
17 or maybe 16.
Yeah.
I think they ran 25 or 6 pages.
They were little, or 20 something.
But it was just, it was like such a, oh my God, it was horrible. And it was like my first big.
Well, if it makes you
thing.
feel better, I couldn't tell.
What I remember was like there was no way to tell what the notes were. So I'd see like part of a cut off word or something, and then Len didn't know because they didn't make copies of everything like that.
Because I had written them on the original art.
Right, and then after that
Back
point
in
is
those
I
days.
think when we started talking on the phone about stuff. But up to that point, Len tried to keep, because the editor didn't want to lose his domain in a sense either. So they tried to keep you segmented so that you all have to answer to him or ask. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's how it existed.
They didn't like if we talked to each other.
No, they didn't want us fraternizing.
You might unionize.
Can happen.
But it was a challenge. The other funny anecdote in talking about Rich Buckler is that Rich is like a really good superhero artist. He's really good. At that period, he was doing a Neil Adams kind of. I want to say he was doing a ripoff of Neil Adams, but his art all looked like Neil Adams panels or whatever. And for me, when I got that, I said, I don't want to do Rich Buckler's the way that Dick Giordano does it, because then it makes it look more like Neil Adams. So I decided in my head it would be better to give it a retro look, because it's a 1940s book. So I was looking at Will Eisner, and I was looking at Wally Wood and stuff as my inspiration. And I maybe went a little overboard, plus working on vellum, I had to use a brush. So those first bunch of pages were weird. But in the preview, the Rich Buckler story was funny. Rich had drawn Robot Man walking through Washington.
I would have otherwise.
And he's like in front of the statue, was it
Iwo Jima?
Which
on December the 6th, 1941.
Didn't exist, but it was a big element of the page too, because it was very dramatic, and there's this really
Robot Man in a trench coat is looking at
this
the Iwo Jima
memorial,
statue,
and everyone like that doesn't impute. So, but that stuff would
It
happen.
became the Washington Monument.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's where I think I came in that I was asked to, like if there was a character that was drawn wrong or something, and that kind of gave me a little confidence.
They paid you lots of extra money for that, didn't they?
You actually paid me out of pocket for
What?
stuff.
I did?
Yeah, because DC wouldn't pay.
What was
That was
for?
the funny thing.
I probably would have.
Like whenever you change a figure, it was like it was supposed to be
if it
someone
was too
else.
much, or something.
DC wouldn't pay me
Yeah.
for it. So it was like, well,
Well, I would have done it.
So it was good. So I mean,
Wow.
I appreciated that. I know you.
I do
also-
remember that when they did one of those books, you did the covers for them, the America versus the Justice Society.
Right.
That on the back we had Al Dellinger had done these that traced off some of the old All-Star covers because we didn't have good reprints of them.
Right.
And one of them is that one that has 100 times reproduced the dot, you know, the Morse code thing, and it was written V and then the dot dash hundreds of times around the characters, and I paid somebody to do that over a weekend to do something like that, because just to reproduce it for the back cover. I must have been nuts, to do that. And nobody would have cared. We could have just, all they cared about was seeing the Justice Society guys, but they had the Morse code on top.
But it was important, and I appreciated that it was important. I think that the bottom line is back then comics were pretty much, you did them and they were out the door, and if you made a mistake, you did it better next time, where you always had that next issue, you'd fix this or something. But I don't think any of us thought that it would be archival in some way.
No.
But you always wanted to do your best work. That's what I've always felt.
And I'll say with you, Jerry, that you were talking about the artist changes on All-Star Squadron, because it was Rich Buckler, and then you went into
Adrian Gonzalez. Yeah.
Although you were inking, and people don't give inking any credit. They don't give the credit to what that art deserves. There was never a huge change in flow. Like when Frank Robbins left the Invaders, and I forgot who came in after
Alan
that.
Kupperberg.
Alan Kupperberg.
Yeah, there's a dramatic change.
It was a huge change where it was like I opened up the book and went, oh my gosh, this isn't the same book.
But Robbins was a very stylized artist too, in his own.
You kept that book together where you didn't even really notice the artistic changes. So that's a testament to you and your style.
Another funny bit was when Rich had left the book. I remember getting a call from Len Wein, and I was new. I was just new to comics, and I had no sense
4 or
of
5
how things
comics
worked.
is already.
Right. So I was like, I remember Len calling me up, and he said, "Well, Rich is leaving the book, and we think we got another guy to draw it." And I'm like thinking he's going to say, "So you're fired or something." I really didn't know. And he's like, "We really like you to stay on." And I was like, "Oh, really? Yeah. No, I didn't even think. I assumed I still had a job." But it was.
But you had to, it was layouts. My memory is right. It was mostly layouts. So you probably got more money from then on.
I was doing layouts on Rich too. I think they kicked in. They were
more detailed.
They were paying for finishes based on that. So yeah, but with Adrian, it was more work. Adrian also had that weird habit of doing. He did really weirdly constructed panels. Like for me, when I draw, I don't like to do small widescreen panels, and he'd take up a big space. It was almost like the Joe Kubert style of storytelling, where you did your one big anchoring panel, and then but in Adrian's case, he would do this big panel, and sometimes it was an important scene, but sometimes it wasn't. So then he would fit, in 3/4 of a page, he would fit in 8 panels under that, and it was always like, well, it's a guy walking down the street. Why did that have to be the big panel?
Yeah, well, he was a little hit or miss. I mean, when I look at it now, I never met him. He was some of his pages. I look at them, and with your inking, of course, but still, I look at them, and they're well composed, and they really look good, and they look as good as anything in the series before or after. And other pages are really lackluster and everything. He was just, he wasn't as polished.
He worked really fast too.
But he did a good job basically, but he really needed you.
Yeah, the only other thing that was funny was when I got those pages, he was a heavy smoker. So when I opened these packages, it was like, I'm not a smoker. But you open the package, it was almost like a puff of smoke. And when you're inking, and there's a smell to nicotine that, because I grew up, my mom had a tavern, so I smelled that. It was a distinct smell. You'd be inking, and it wasn't as bad in the winter when the humidity was low, but in the summertime when you're inking and you get anywhere near that page, that's all you could smell. It was this stench of.
You were working on starting the penciling of your first, the last 1 or 2.
He did the Trial of the Robot Man.
The Trial of the Robot, and he did the Valhalla, and I think he did about 3 issues in a row, so you could get started. So you could get started on number 19, and he did the last 3.
Right.
And that's why, in fact, I have a copy of Adrian's pencil layouts to that last issue, the Tarantula and the Victim Valhalla thing, because they were sent to Rick or something, or to
reference or something,
as a reference or something like that. And that's why I ended up with those copies.
Well, you know how I became the penciler of All-Star Squadron? I'm not a pushy person. I'm easygoing, and I don't really like to be abrasive. But I've been all along while I was working on All-Star, I never really wanted to be an inker, because as much as I appreciate and like it, it's a lower man on a totem pole, and inkers never did get any credit for, the deadline, whatever it is, you got to finish it up. So I didn't want to be stuck there. So I was always trying to get pencil work, and I would show Len Wein pencils, and I'd say, well, is there any of nothing? No, sorry, they don't want to upset the apple cart. So I was doing All-Star Squadron, and I was supposed to do, it's like, oh, you can take over Huntress, which was a backup in Wonder Woman. Joe Staten's going to be leaving it. Well, then I get on the book, and I inked like 2 issues of Joe Staten's Huntress, thinking it was going to transition. I'd be able to pencil an 8-page or whatever it was backup in addition to the other stuff. And then I wound up meeting Joe, and I said, oh, I'm taking over Huntress when you're done. And he was like, I'm leaving? And they were like, oh, the editor basically lied to me. So then I quit Huntress.
The editor lied to you. Mark that on your calendar.
I know. I quit Huntress. I said, well, I was in this because I thought I was transitioning. So I quit it, and then I got a call maybe a day later from Ernie Colon, who was editing Flash, and he had a backup with the Creeper or something. There was some backup that was running, and he said, I can give you, it's 8 pages a month, pencils and inks, and you could do that. But I have to quit, All-Star. So I called up Len and I said, I really want a pencil, and Ernie offered me this, and I think I want to take it. And Len goes, why don't you pencil All-Star Squadron? And I'm like, because this guy's got the job, and I don't want to be responsible for getting somebody, having them lose work. And it's like, no, we have plenty of stuff for him, and I'd rather keep you. So that's how I wound up with it. I was hoping the transition, like my first penciling thing, wouldn't be a 22-page monthly book. I was hoping to kind of because you gear up.
That's why you got the 3 months
right, I had a little lead
start on it. Yeah.
And then I also inked the first 2, I think.
Yeah, a couple of them. Yeah.
So poor Joe didn't find out on Twitter that he was on the book. Is that how that happens?
Yeah. And I guess
They
that's when
switched them
Adrian
on
went
to
to
Arac.
Arac, when we needed an Arac pencil around that time and everything, and which weirdly Ernie Colon had been the pencil
that's
wearer.
fun.
So it's a very
That's
incestuous little group. There's like 5 people moving around, the different books. Yeah, in fact, I liked Mike's inking. I missed your inking. I mean, I liked Mike's inking. He was the second best inker, on the book. And I was really sorry to see, but I could see that you couldn't pencil and ink 22 pages a month and everything.
I still can't.
And Mike made a good, because you guys had been buddies and you'd worked together, and he made a good second choice. He did a good job.
Yeah, and it fit the book to a degree too.
Yeah, oh, yeah,
It gave it it still had a little bit of a retro feel to it.
Mm-hmm. So you were on the first, the first 18 you inked, and then so you were on through 20-something in there.
Yeah, I did. I also did the one.
And then, of course, you did covers for several issues.
Yeah,
and then you even inked Rick Cober's pencil 5 or 10 after that. So
I also did the issue with the 7 Soldiers of Victory.
Yeah. Okay.
That was a fun one to do. I was signing when we were signing. My favorite, I think, of the All-Star Squadron stories. My favorite one is still the one with the alien with the. Giving away to everybody. It was like the day the Earth stood still. There was like a fake alien presence thing with the scientists and stuff. Yeah. That was my favorite story. As a story.
Yeah, I like that story. I swiped that off an old radio show.
But it was a great story, and I really liked when we were working on it. I liked the one with Green Lantern destroying Japan and stuff. I thought that, but there were certain ones that seemed because mostly when you're doing a monthly book, you don't really. The idea is not to have an ending. Really, it's always something that leads you to the next issue. So when you have one that feels kind of self-contained, you kind of almost embrace it more in a way too. So.
I remember as a reader, I don't know how many of you guys and gals are, pre-crisis, post-crisis, but I was reading Crisis and I'm thinking, I was a huge Earth 1, Earth 2 fan like you were saying, because for me it was like sort of that window into my dad's youth, because these were the characters he read. And you could see Superman and Batman being old. And as Crisis happened, I was kind of into it. I'm like, you know what? This is really kind of cool. They're going to streamline everything. This is going to be this. This is what's going to happen. And then, as I'm really getting into it, I'm like, holy crap. We're not going to have the All-Star Squadron anymore.
Don't take my world.
Because all of a sudden, everything that I loved was gone. I mean, and Flash was my favorite hero at DC at the time. He was gone. So it seemed like a lot of that. Now, do you remember sort of that hiccup when all of a sudden it's like, hey, you guys got to kind of change direction with All-Star Squadron right now, and Things are going to be a little different.
I was working on Crisis.
You were working on Crisis.
Yeah, which was
you were part of the problem.
It was, it was weird. Well, they again, in the case of being lied to, but I was pitching a Huntress miniseries while I was doing Crisis, and they were like, "Yeah, that's definitely a go." You know, and then as I was getting towards the end of Crisis, and I was saying, "Well, I'm ready to. I should start working on this. I'm submitting plots," and they were like, "Does it rely on Earth 2 Huntress?" And I was like, "Well, it's built on her having a history." I was like, "Oh, well, we're killing off Earth 2 Huntress." And I was like, "Okay, well, that's not what you said."
Yeah.
You know. So I was under the assumption that the Earth 2 being taken out of the equation was actually a late addition, but yet other people have said no, that was built into it from the start.
Well,
what do you remember?
Only in the sense that I was lied to, like you were.
Yeah.
I was originally told it wouldn't, and then it was sort of like, well, you might not be able to use Superman and Batman, but
Which
then it
is one
became
thing,
then
right.
it became Wonder Woman too.
Right.
You know, by the time they were done, they all took out Green Arrow and even Aquaman,
Right,
yeah,
and so forth.
Right.
And I tried to help out. I was, as Marv has written a number of times, very, very successful because I saw this is the way things were going, so I may as well, you know, I may as well help him out doing it and so forth. That was sort of my job. And I thought the book was, you know, quite well done because Marv and George are enormous talents. But I really just hated the whole thing, and I never felt good about DC for 1 minute since. You know, and it partly because of what they did, but partly because I felt kind of lied to. You know, I found out that the whole thing about Superman and Batman not being able to use the whole thing from Marv Wolfman in England in 1985 when my wife and I were there and ran into him at a comics convention that we weren't even scheduled to meet at. And he's the one that gave me that information. DC couldn't be bothered. And, you know, I thought, gee, you know, I used to think that somehow DC was a little classier act than Marvel, but it turned out it was actually the other way around by that point, you know.
It was a weird.
Yeah, but a lot of people got screwed over. I got screwed over worse than most. It wasn't like they were trying to do it to me. They just ruined a book that already, I mean, All-Star wasn't a big book anymore. It had never really, you know, found his feet as much. Once, you know, Jerry was kind of gone from it, we got some good issues here and there, and I was still happy writing it, but it wasn't as popular. We never managed to quite catch that same magic we had for the first, you know, 2 or 3 years or something like that. And, you know, maybe if we kept on going for a while, though, we might have found it again. It was just a case of getting the right, you know, the right artist and the right storyline.
But honestly, you had to find, because I was aware during that time, there were, DC had, I mean, Roy was the writer-editor on the thing. And it was definitely like a little bit of a resistance from, I dealt with New York and then I deal with Roy, and there was definitely a feeling of maybe not they're trying to undermine anything, but it was like a different world, you know. So I think that
we should have. I always thought we were all on the same side.
Yeah, well,
I mean, I was kind of independent, but I was very cooperative. Like with Crisis, which I didn't even like as an idea, but I was very cooperative and so forth. But I found that, you know, they just use you like toilet paper and throw you away.
Well, the bad thing though is by being separated like that is that you were kind of having to find your own artist as opposed to having.
That's one reason I wasn't able to get.
Right.
You know, they weren't helping at all. You know, they would suggest somebody, but I knew it was only somebody they wouldn't give anything else to. You know.
That's the problem because you know that kind of shows you that. There was I mean, I don't know, they probably were looking for ways to eliminate.
Well, thank you for justifying what I was afraid was a paranoid fantasy. No, actually, I never was. I always knew it was real.
Yeah, I mean, I felt it too because I was kind of torn.
Crazy.
I felt torn between those two. And when I quit Infinity Inc., I quit, and I knew that it would not be good. I had offers from DC to do stuff for DC. I went to Marvel kind of because I didn't want to get in between that because I thought, I mean, it really, again, I was a young guy. I didn't really, but it just felt like wrong in a way. You know? And I think it happened to Kirby when Kirby was in that position of being a writer-editor too. There's a certain kind of, maybe even a resentment. Why does he get to do it in California? I don't know, whatever. Mm-hmm. There's stuff that does come up, and it's unfortunate, but I didn't want to be in the middle of that either. Yeah. I think if I had quit Infinity Inc. to do Batman, it would have been kind of, to me, it wouldn't have been the point. That wasn't the point, you know. My point was that DC was would pay me like $1 more per page or something. It was the stupidest
Well,
thing.
that's a good principle.
And Mike Carlin, that was the first thing he told me. I'm going to pay you, is like, DC will pay you this, I'm going to pay you $99 a page or something. It was just the funniest thing, but that's how the industry was.
And you see, I mentioning Jack Kirby, I loved Our Fighting Forces run. That when I was a kid playing war, I would always want to be in Japan and the islands playing Bushido, which our Fighting Forces 154, I believe. And you see back then reading the letters pages as a kid. I'm a 9-10-year-old kid reading these letters pages, and they're like, I don't know why you have this Mr. Kirby on this book. He is horrible. And it was like, even as a young kid, I'm like, why are they trying to bash this guy? And then I saw when I was reading Captain America, after when he went back to Captain America, after I got into the character, they were doing the same thing in those letters pages. Why is this man writing these horrible books and telling these terrible tales? And I'm thinking, why are they putting these horrible letters in the book?
This is another one that probably maybe you understood or knew at the time, but I remember talking, again, I remember talking to Len Wein, and we talked, because you and I talked about Hubert and doing the covers, the fact that it were kind of like, maybe it's time we could be doing the covers or whatever. And it was resistance, and I understood it because Hubert, is Joe Hubert. But then there was a point, Len always had a vision of the book too that was, I think, different from what you were. And I think
you never told me because I wouldn't listen.
Right, but I think you were proven right in a sense, because Len's point, when I didn't talk to him a lot, but we did talk.
He could have brought it up to me, he just never did.
He wanted a Justice Society book, which is kind of interesting. He wanted it to be a Justice Society book. He told me that, and I was like, again, like I said before, I like Robot Man, I like Liberty Bell, and I think, to me, I look back on when I was a teen and I read the Avengers, I loved the fact that the Avengers were characters that were kind of second stringers when you lost, Thor or
of course, I hated
whatever.
that. I fought that all the time, but I always lost to
But I like the fact that those characters.
But I like to do the other characters. I just always wanted to bring in Captain America.
It was
Thor,
always the
Iron
same
Man.
thing for me with with All Star, was that you made these characters that
the
were
reason
kind
I
of
did
second
that,
stringers.
besides one of the reasons I did it, is because they had just had that All-Star book in the 70s, under first Jerry and then Paul Evans, and it had been a good book in many ways, but it had just been canceled about a year before, so I thought it was time to do something different. And the other reason is just pure, I was really tired of it. I mean, I love comics, but I was tired of it, of the regular thing. I wanted to do something. I just wanted to do what I wanted to do. And if it worked out, it worked out. It wasn't, commerciality was not my. Obviously, it was not my major thing anymore. I'd had a number of years of doing that when I was working with Stan. Barry Smith, when he quit Conan and he went over and he was going to do a Batman story for DC when he first did, he talked about it. And I said, why do you want to go over to DC if you're quitting there? Stan will put you on other superheroes or things like that. He says, well, he says, I want to get this involved. He says, and going to DC is a little like quitting comics. He said, that was his viewpoint. I don't say it was right, because I have a great respect for the DC characters, but that was his viewpoint. And eventually I came to kind of share it, not so much share that viewpoint, but to think that I was just going to go do things my own way. And I happened to have the power at that time to do it, coming in from my years at Marvel, to do that. Eventually it kind of frittered away, because then those books don't sell well and you lose some of that power. But I'm still glad I did it, because of all the books I ever wrote, and Invaders and certainly Conan, my favorite comic book to work on of all time was All-Star Squadron. It wasn't a Marvel book at all. It had its little Marvel style to it. But Stan wouldn't have let me do All-Star Squadron either, because it would have been, he'd say, who are the heroes of this book? There's one issue, it's this guy, and one issue. And I always thought of it as less a regular comic book. I used to use the expression, and it really was true in my mind, like a tapestry. There's a lot of characters on here, and I'd pick some out and try to emphasize. But obviously there was that little core of, Liberty Bell and Robot Man and the Shining Knight and Johnny Quick and then later developed Tarantula with a great costume that Jerry.
Well, even bringing in Steel.
Integrating the Steel story. He was a new character. Jerry. I didn't like the name Steel, but I promoted him to Commander Steel.
Right.
And Len would never put that name on the cover for some reason. 2 or 3 different visions of that when we had the crossover between the All-Star Squadron, and every issue I tell him it should be Commander Steel. He would just put Steel in it. But there was always a little personality tug of war. It wasn't just Len and I, get along and all. And also, like, I was torn with the Kubert covers because Joe Kubert is my favorite all-time comic artist. I mean, Jack Kirby would probably be second.
So that's my 1 and 1A, those two right there.
Yeah, and I never read his war comics much because I just didn't like war comics, opposite of you, but Hawkman, you're going back, and Thor, God, and Viking Prince. But, but I didn't like him doing the covers that much because as much as I loved them as art, he even gave me one once, but I didn't think they were as commercial as they would have been by Rich or somebody else. It was a little scratchy, and I felt people remember his Hawkman had not sold ever well enough to get its own book. It took forever. So I felt like, Kubert's really good, but the superhero fans don't like him as much. So I felt it was a mistake to have him do the covers. And yet, I'd be torn because I'd see the cover and say, boy, I love this cover. Boy, I wish some other artist would do it. So I was really torn. I would have loved to have owned any of those covers, but I didn't think they were the most
He just wasn't known for superheroes by that time.
By that time.
People, they had
They equated him to the war books. That was what it was.
Right, right.
Yeah. And but it was really great. Now, the first thing that you ended up getting a cover on was an annual.
Yeah.
An All-Star Squadron annual. That was while Adrian was still drawing it. So
yeah, he drew the story. That was the story that tied Green Lantern.
So that was your first penciling on the book before the All-Star Squadron 19 was the cover?
Yeah, and that was by virtual lobbying. I kept lobbying Len about that too.
Well, you had done a cover for that Alien.
I did it, right. It was like we did, right, the Alien storyline, which I love so much. It's like, okay, I'm going to just do this without anybody telling me.
I don't think you ever showed it to me, but you showed it to Len.
They already had the cover. Hubert had already done the cover for it, so it was. But then it wound up being used as a pinup at some point.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it was a good drawing.
But the annual, that was another great story. I think that annual that tied Wildcat and the Atom and Guardian together, but it also had a thread for Green Lantern tied to the,
Oh yeah, at the end.
It was a great. I mean, that was a great. And I think that's my favorite, probably favorite job of finishing over Adrian Gonzalez because
Well, there were some really excellent splash panels. 2 or 3 splash panels in there that he did a really nice layout. The two of you together was, and I loved the splash panel because I was thinking, well, I was going to have Green Lantern, Flash, and Wonder Woman. I thought, well, what did they were always on the cover of Comic Cavalcade together. They were always doing these. They never fought crooks on the covers. They were always doing things like, there was one scene. Which is what I took, where it was paper drive, or in this case they're riding a tightrope walk across there doing some dumb thing. So I decided to make that the splash page and make it into stories. I just like doing stuff like that because I didn't have all those old comics, but I had access to it, and I got DC to make a lot of black and white Xeroxes of a lot of stories, so that I could read them, and then I would use them, and we'd make other copies and send them out and so forth. And because I didn't have all those books either. I had all the All-Stars, and I had some others, but not a huge number of them. But, people would say, well, if you read these books, you have to have read all these books back in the 40s, but it was not true. Because between footnotes, we always managed, even without the footnotes, if there hadn't been footnotes, I always told readers and showed readers with what Jerry does would draw, whatever they needed to know, and everything. You just had to kind of meet us halfway and so forth. And I felt a lot of the stuff about complaining about my putting footnotes in, because readers who didn't care about them just wouldn't read them anyway. And if they did read them, they got something else out of it. And I just felt a lot of that was just kind of sour grapes because the same problem that you said you had later with the Shazam series, where you felt like people just didn't want you to do the Shazam series. Right. People didn't want you to do All-Star Squadron particularly,
But I always like footnotes. I mean, as a reader,
I did too.
I appreciate it because it's nothing more frustrating than looking at a comic, for example, and this became the style maybe in the late 90s, I think, where you would have a character and the artist would either, nothing was, there was no clarity to it. You look at a book and you go, okay, I'm 5 pages in and I don't know who this character is. Nobody has said, and there's rules now about this too. Like when I was doing the conversions, Infinity Inc. was in this conversions thing that DC did. And then one of the rules was, they always change, but this time the rule was, not to have a little balloon saying who the character was. You know what I mean? So you're taking it out of, so you have somebody say, "Oh, Jade, how is Todd?"
Yeah,
You know,
made
so
it part of the dialogue.
We
which
made it
makes
less
sense
obvious,
now.
but then it was like, okay, here's a little logo with their, you could show the logo for the character, and here's, daughter of Green Lantern, whatever it was. We don't do that anymore because so every couple of years there's a new rule, and they all seem kind of counterintuitive to trying to have people understand what's going on in your story.
They seem to forget that this comic book may be somebody's first comic.
Exactly.
And you need
And it may
to
be
know
their
these-
last. If you don't grab them, it'll be their last.
And it's really interesting, as you were talking about like the secondary characters and the lower tier ones, it makes complete sense with the Invaders, where you were bringing in the Crusaders, and you brought in the Kid Commandos, and you were all these other characters that were away from the main five.
Well, I got bored all the time. I was always just trying to come up with something new, and everything. And, it was just trying to find some way to earn money and have fun at the same time. And the nice thing was, Stan didn't pay any attention to those books, because he would have never let me do Invaders.
Yes.
Ordinarily, because he did those couple of stories with Jack, we told him a couple of Captain America stories. That's just because he didn't know what to do with Captain America when he wasn't an Avenger. And if I had gone into him and said, I want to do a comic book set in World War II, if I'd gone in a year or two earlier and said that, he'd have thrown me out of the office. Come on, dude.
Excelsior!
But I did my shots. We had just come to a parting of the ways at Marvel, where basically I half quit, half fired, so forth, I said, I won't do some of this stuff. And he said, okay, this is your letter of resignation. I said, that's fine. I'm ready to go to D.C. I know Carmine will give me a job there in a second. He might be right Superman, but he'll give me a job. And so I don't even mention anything about working for Marvel anymore. He says, no, I want you to stay working for Marvel. He says, he was getting a lot of pressure from people above him because Stan and I still liked each other. The people above me, I wasn't a company man. And of course they were absolutely right. And so he wants me to stay. So he wants me to stay, and I figured that's a good time. So I said, well, hey, it says I need another book to do along with Conan. So I said, I got a great idea. I said, let's do Captain America, Human Torch, and we'll tell stories set in World War II. And I said, I got a great title for it. So what it says, it's The Invaders, and he says, I like that title. And what he didn't remember is that about 3 or 4 years earlier, around the time of, right before we gave everybody their own book in '68, he had this idea for about 2 days to combine the Hulk and Submariner. Remember, they had it in a comic book all on their own and called them The Invaders. And he forgot that after a couple of days, and then, and maybe there was the TV show in between, but he totally forgot it. But I remembered it, so I said, I got a great title for the book. I said, it's The Invaders. And he said, I like that title. And I think that's what probably sold it, with the fact that I gave him his own title.
And that whole scene, I don't know if you realize or understand how much that meant to my childhood. I picture that whole scene in the first issue, not the giant size, when Winston Churchill stuck his fingers out and did the peace thing and said, I'll call you guys ought to be the Invaders. But in that next one, when they were talking about the name, we should be the All-Winner Squad. We should be the Avenging Americans. Well, you're an android, Torch. You're not even an American. And then the fight happened in Namor's ship. If you've never read the first issue of The Invaders, the Human Torch and Submariner get into a fist fight in Submariner's little ship. And then the only reason they stop is that they show up and like, oh, hey, look, the Junkers are now bombing London, why don't we go help? That's the only thing that stopped the fights. But that is my childhood, and I know that's.
And you haven't even gotten to the fact that Wagner's ring cycle is in there.
Oh my gosh, yeah. That just. I could sit here forever and ever and ever and listen to these stories because that is my childhood, and we only have like 4 or 5 minutes or 3 minutes now.
Do you have any questions?
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions?
We'll try to answer briefly so we can get a couple.
So, with Convergence having happened and them saying everything is now canon, yay, if they ever came to you and said, Roy, go finish All-Star Squadron the way you want to do it, would you do it?
I've said this more than once, and recently I said that All-Star, my favorite comics ride of all time. If I had not left, we'd be up to about issue number 300 and something now, and we might have even reached 1943. I can't. I said this to Kevin Smith, the director who interviewed me and Stan at the Hammer Museum out in LA a few months ago, in connection with that humongous book. He said, he asked me about what book would I most like to write. I said, if there was one book I could go on writing forever, it would be All-Star Squadron. But I said, but of the Marvel books, it would be The Invaders. I said, and Conan, those 3 books, any of those I could have gone on writing till I'm 76 or 77 instead of the 74 I am now. But, I could have just written those forever. I only left them. The Avengers, at a certain stage, much as I liked that, I had nowhere to go with it. I could have gone on writing it forever, but I have no great desire to go back to it, though I could. But Avengers or All-Star Squadron or Conan, I could just write those things, forever.
Well, with All-Star Squadron, you had the war as kind of like a thread running through it, which gives you forward movement. Plus, in comics back then, you really couldn't do stuff because they would always say, well, there's a new audience, so a guy couldn't age in real time because they'd always either have to reset something.
In my books, it's always 1942.
Well, but you had the ability to have characters age because you would progress through the war.
Of course, I wanted to do versions in both books of changing the war. Suddenly having, Roosevelt get killed or something and having the war go differently. But that was mainly because it was just, a way to keep the book going.
Yeah.
Any last question or two before we have to go?
Could each of you maybe sum up what you enjoyed about working with each other?
I'll let Jerry go first.
I'll tell you, it's like and I've told Roy this before too. Roy was really hard on me, but it was like boot camp to me. It was a hard project.
What are you talking about?
It wasn't like he wasn't mean. It was just he had very high standards for the book, and I resented that. But then I didn't. You know what I mean? It's like someone, if you're in school and you have a really hard test that you have to study for, you feel so much better when you get a good grade. And that's how I looked at it. And in a way, that was the joy of it, was the fact that he cared so much that I felt like I had a standard beyond what I could have done less. But I felt like that was the perfect thing to do as the new guy, because it set me on that path, not to undermine my own self, and always to strive for the best.
I don't know what grade Jerry thought he had. I always, to me it was always an A, but I maybe didn't communicating it enough, because my feeling was always, we're both trying to do our best job, so I don't stop all the time, maybe tell people, how great a job they're doing. Stan didn't tell me that often either,
It was a different time.
But to me, like I wasn't happy about having you as an inker, and then I wasn't happy about having you as a penciler, because Len says you're going to pencil. Well, maybe you can't pencil. And it took about 2 pages in before I decided, this is the perfect, this is what. When I turned that one page finally and saw this drawing of the All-Star Squad looking up, and something like 8 members of the Justice Society are all like stapled to this machine inside the Crown of Perisphere. That was it. You won me over, and there was never any. It was okay before that, but but after that, there was never any doubt again.
But it was a fun collaboration, and it was like anything. You have a point where I was ready to move on, because I never liked doing lots of characters. And I always wind up getting typecast in that, because I'm not George Perez. George loves doing that, but I wound up being on projects that then people assume it. If I had my druthers, I would have done a tarantula book with just a tarantula. But
I wish we could done it.
All-Star, as Roy said before, All-Star Squadron had a lot of characters, had potentially every character that appeared in a DC comic, which was cool, but it was also like, oh my God, at one point they're all going to be in the same room together.
And the quality characters too, and eventually, and sometimes the Fawcett characters.
It's just hard, as an artist, it's hard to fit it into a page. That's the hard part.
So, Jerry, you're here all weekend?
Yes.
And Roy, you're here today and tomorrow.
Tomorrow, yeah.
So don't forget to go down and talk to these guys. A world of information and a lot of fun. And I want to thank you guys for
Thank you.
sharing your stories as well as your
Thank you for
talents.
coming.
That's huge. And
Thank you for being more than 2 people.